The blind date was supposed to be over. He had already paid the bill, said goodbye, and stepped out into the cool night air. But just as the single dad reached the parking lot, he heard something that made him stop mid-step, a small child crying softly in the darkness. He almost kept walking. Almost. Because the moment he turned back toward that sound, he had no idea his entire life was about to change forever. Daniel Carter hadn't planned on dating again. Not after everything that had happened. 3 years earlier, his wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone to raise his 6-year-old daughter Lily. Since then, life had been a careful routine, work during the day, bedtime stories at night, and quiet evenings filled with memories he wasn't ready to let go of. His sister, however, refused to let him hide from the world forever. Just one blind date, she insisted. You deserve to be happy again. Daniel finally agreed, mostly just to make her stop asking. The restaurant was small but warm, with soft music playing and candles flickering on every table. His date, Amanda, was polite and friendly enough, but there was no spark. They talked about work, movies, and the weather. It felt forced, like two strangers trying to read from a script. After an hour, Daniel politely ended the evening. Amanda smiled politely. It was nice meeting you. You too, Daniel replied, though he knew there wouldn't be a second date. He stepped outside into the chilly evening, breathing in the quiet. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the pavement. And then he heard it. A child crying. Not loud, but unmistakable. Daniel froze. The sound came from somewhere near the alley beside the restaurant. At first he thought maybe it was a stray cat, but the crying came again, soft, shaky, scared. He hesitated. He had promised himself he wouldn't get involved in things that weren't his business. Life was complicated enough already. But then he remembered Lily. And the thought of any child being alone in the dark made his chest tighten. Daniel slowly walked toward the alley. Hello, he called gently. The crying stopped for a moment. Then a small voice whispered, Mama? Daniel's heart sank. When he turned the corner, he saw a little boy sitting on the ground near a dumpster. He couldn't have been older than 4. His small arms wrapped around his knees, his cheeks wet with tears. And beside him stood a woman, crouched down, trying to comfort him. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled into a messy ponytail, wearing a thin jacket that clearly wasn't warm enough for the cold night. The moment she noticed Daniel, she quickly stood up, protective. I'm sorry, she said quickly. We're leaving. Daniel raised his hands gently. It's okay. I just heard him crying and wanted to make sure everything was all right. The boy sniffled. He's scared, the woman admitted quietly. We missed the last bus. Daniel looked around. The street was nearly empty. You've been here the whole time? He asked. She nodded. My name's Sarah, she said after a moment. And this is my son, Noah. Daniel crouched down slightly so he was closer to the boy's height. Hey, Noah, he said softly. I'm Daniel. The boy looked at him cautiously but stopped crying. Sarah sighed. I was supposed to pick up a night shift at the hospital. But the babysitter canceled, and everything just fell apart tonight. Daniel understood that feeling more than she knew. Life falling apart. Plans collapsing. Trying to stay strong for your child even when you felt like you were drowning. He stood there for a moment, thinking. Then he said something that surprised even himself. Do you need a ride? Sarah hesitated immediately. I can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask, Daniel said with a small smile. I offered. She looked down at Noah, who was rubbing his tired eyes. After a long pause, she nodded. Okay, thank you. During the drive, Noah fell asleep in the back seat within minutes. The quiet car ride felt strangely comfortable. Sarah stared out the window at first, then eventually spoke. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I usually keep things more together." Daniel chuckled softly. "Trust me. I've had plenty of nights like that." She looked at him. "You have kids?" "A daughter," he said. "Lily. She's 6. Sarah smiled faintly. "Single dad?" "Yeah." For the first time that night, Sarah's shoulders relaxed. Something about knowing he understood changed everything. They talked the rest of the drive. About parenting. About exhaustion. About the strange strength that comes from loving a child more than yourself. By the time they reached Sarah's small apartment building, something unexpected had happened. The conversation had started feeling easy. Natural. Real. Daniel parked the car and carefully carried Noah inside while Sarah unlocked the door. The small apartment was modest but clean. Toys sat neatly in a corner. When Daniel gently placed Noah on the couch, the boy half woke. "Mom?" "I'm here," Sarah whispered. Daniel stepped toward the door. But before he could leave, Sarah spoke. "Daniel, wait." He turned. She hesitated, clearly unsure what to say. Then she smiled softly. "You know, you technically just rescued a blind date." Daniel laughed. "That makes 2 of us." For the next few weeks, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that night. Not the awkward dinner. Not Amanda. But the quiet moment in the alley, and the tired single mother who had been trying her best to hold everything together. Then one afternoon, fate stepped in again. Daniel was at the park with Lily when he heard a familiar voice. "Noah, slow down." He turned. And there she was. Sarah. Standing near the playground, chasing after her energetic son. For a moment, they both stared at each other in surprise. Then they both laughed. "Small world," Daniel said. "Apparently," Sarah replied. Lily immediately ran toward the playground. Noah followed. Within minutes, the 2 kids were playing like they had known each other forever. Daniel and Sarah sat on a nearby bench, watching them. "What are the chances?" Sarah said. Daniel smiled. "Maybe that crying in the alley wasn't an accident." Sarah looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Maybe it was the universe giving 2 exhausted single parents a second chance." She looked back at the children. For a moment, neither of them spoke. But something warm settled between them. Something hopeful. Weeks turned into months. Park visits became coffee. Coffee became dinners. And slowly, carefully, 2 broken lives began to rebuild together. One evening, months later, Daniel stood in the kitchen while Lily and Noah laughed in the living room. Sarah walked in quietly beside him. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "If Noah hadn't cried that night, we never would have met." Daniel smiled softly. "Then I guess that was the most important cry in the world." She laughed. But then she reached for his hand. And in that moment, Daniel realized something powerful. Sometimes life doesn't bring love in perfect, planned moments. Sometimes it arrives unexpectedly. In a dark alley. In the sound of a child crying. And in the courage of 2 people who are simply trying to keep going. Because sometimes the best love stories don't begin with a perfect date. They begin when someone chooses to stop walking away, and turn back toward a cry in the dark.